Terrific. Thank you for that, Mark. So now over to you, Malte Meinshausen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susanna. Thank you so much, Mark. And hello, it's also good to see my colleague, Frank Jotzo. They had an intense week of meetings and sessions with the governments. It is a somewhat interesting process when, as a scientist, you compile the synthesis over the last 2 years across these working group reports, and then you're up there on stage defending the science and coming together with the governments to policy relevant formulations that both speak the government's language as well as are true to the science. And that was the intense process that we went through until actually this morning. So I think our cumulative sleep budget is well exhausted. And in terms of the messages, while Mark was speaking more towards adaptation, I will speak more about some of the key emission pathways and milestones. And so the one new thing that you find in the report that is a new synthesis and a new focus, a number that is also not in the underlying reports, even though it is in the underlying figures and databases, is, for example, a milestone and indication for where governments might want to go with emissions if they intend to achieve the 1.5 or 2 degree targets or temperature levels by 2035. 2035 is important as a milestone for the next global stocktake. At the moment, the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are the climate targets for the countries, they're geared towards 2030. The next step will be 2035. And so there for 2035, this report provides indication of 60% greenhouse gas emission reductions below 2019 levels by 2035. And for CO2, it will be 65%. Just in comparison, the 2030 numbers are 43% for greenhouse gas, 48% for CO2, and we also specify for methane, roughly a 30% reduction by 2030. Again, these are based on the modeled scenarios and that were assessed. About 1,200 of them were vetted and categorized in terms of their climate outcome. And that was from Working Group 3. But these are some key numbers where we have now, you will see a special table in the synthesis report. I will not tell you news when I tell you that this synthesis report confirmed again the picture that while we have these clear milestones, the current indices in their aggregate, in their sum, do not actually go to these levels yet. There is a substantial emission gap, and substantial emission gap is the wording that this report chooses, and also there's an implementation gap. Even these targets are not yet underpinned fully with policies, so there is some implementation gap, but this ambition gap between where do the targets would lead us in 2030, which is roughly a flat line, towards these rather substantial decreases in terms of CO2, it's really a halving of emissions this decade, is not really news. What is more emphasized than previously is that this decade is really the last decade, and until 2030 is the last time window that we have a chance to keep global warming to 1.5 degree temperatures in the next assessment cycle. So if we are presenting you the next report, that chance will have gone. There are no pathways anymore unless they have a high overshoot of 1.5 degrees that would make it then back to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. So it is the emission reductions in terms of CO2 roughly are halving this decade. In terms of greenhouse gas, there's 43%. That is really the last chance to get out of bed in order to climb the mountain by the end of the day. And then lastly, before I hand over to Frank on the key question, well, haven't we shot past 1.5 degrees already? No, we haven't. We show and analyze again the scenarios, about 100 of them, that show 1.5 degree with no or limited overshoot. And given the natural variability, which is plus minus 0.2 degrees, we can say that our best estimate is for the lowest class of scenarios really to stay around 1.5 degrees. We make quite clear that in the near term, by the 2030s, we are going to see these average global warming levels. But in any single year, there's a chance by 2030 that 40 to 60% chance that we are going to see 1.5 degree warming. But that doesn't mean that we crossed it and that we keep that we have 1.5 degree in the rear mirror. We can still choose with the actions now to then limit warming to below 1.5 degrees in the longer term. Thank you very much. And I hand over to my colleague, Frank Jotzo.